Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Locomotive History. And today, we're going to talk about the Midwest and Southern Railroad. Specifically, we're going to talk about three companies: the Cypress and Central, the McKinnon and Midwestern, and finally, the Foley and South Railroad. The first railroad, the Cypress and Central, is the former Grand Central Railroad, which was bought in 1853 by Mr. Jack Walker from the Henderson Iron Company. When he bought the railroad, Mr. Walker got a hold of the previous locomotives, specifically the Killingsworth locomotive and the small 040 engine. Mr. Walker sold the Killingsworth to the Jackson Iron Company, and it was then put in use as a pump engine. It was then that he ordered two new locomotives, which were built in 1849, but unfortunately, they were all he could afford at the time. These were 460 locomotives, commonly known as 10-wheelers. These locomotives, which were brought in, could hold almost 600 tons of iron ore. But unfortunately, accidents did happen, as it turns out the rails that the former railroad laid were of poor quality and poor construction. It was then that he decided to rebuild the railroad and double-track it. This was done and finished by late 1858. It was during this time that 5 more engines were brought on to help with the increased load. These were custom engines built by Baldwin and were 462 and both used for passenger and freight trains. Unfortunately, a year after they were brought in 1857, locomotive number 32 suffered a boiler crack, resulting in its detonation at the Cypress and Central's roundhouse in Perry, Oklahoma. In 1869, 3 more locomotives were brought in. These were experimental 260 4-cylinder compound locomotives built by the Norris Locomotive Works. Unfortunately, all were scrapped. But, due to sheer luck and determination, a group, founded in 2024, is hoping to rebuild one of the Norris engines as a replica. By 1861, the company was flourishing, with over 1,000 miles of track and many locomotives. It was during this time that a lumber company called the Pinewood Timber Co. decided to contact the Cypress and Central and ask permission to build a rail line across theirs and through their rails in order to get to the large amount of timberland they owned and were currently logging. The company agreed, and the small logging line was built. The company also, in 1861, decided to expand north towards the state line and eventually enter the northern state. In 1863, a new celebration was held in which 8 new locomotives, built by the Baldwin Company, that were 440 in design, otherwise known as the American type, were shown off to the public. The company, which continued to expand both north and south into Texas in order to get into the flourishing oil business, resulted in more locomotives, resulting in a grand total of 24 of the Baldwin 440s, which became the commonplace locomotive on the rail line. By 1870, the company had over 2,000 miles of track, and in 1876, Mr. John Walker, the man who had bought the railroad, retired, and his son Hezekiah Walker took over as the owner and CEO of the railroad. The company then, the following year, in 1877, bought 20 brand new Baldwin Consolidation or 280 locomotives. Of the 20 originals, 19 were rebuilt in later 1890 and 1918 into 482 mountain types, with a single engine, number 66, being the lone locomotive that was never converted. By 1881, the railroad had grown so large that it resulted in a name change to the Greater Southern Railroad. In 1860, the McKinnon Minnow Railroad and the Midwestern Railroad merged to form the McKinnon and Midwestern Railroad. This rail line, which became famous for its service and the sheer volume of goods it shipped, became famous. The company operated and by 1867 had decided to expand more, specifically down into Kansas, where they exploited the gypsum trade. In 1867, 6 new locomotives by the Pearson Company, known as the 112 class, were built. These were 280 locomotives. Several of them were built. The following year, 15 new locomotives of the 460 wheel arrangement were built by the Pearson Company. The company continued to prosper, but unfortunately, in 1875, an accident did happen which would end the famous railroad. In 1875, one locomotive, number 90, of the new Pearson 112 class was hauling a 3,000-ton plus gypsum train. The locomotive suffered some type of brake failure, but no one is 100% for sure as the engine was destroyed in the crash. The locomotive, which had lost control, turned right outside the Missouri River location for the company. The resulting crash in the large neighborhood area where most of the workers for the railroad and surrounding industries lived died when the engine ran off the line and turned over, which resulted in the entire train wrecking. Many people looked into it and found that the track had not been properly maintained, nor had the railroad been maintained, and the railroad was sued. The company fought back and even introduced a brand new mountain type in 1884. Unfortunately, this could not save the company, and it had to declare bankruptcy due to low ridership and low freight movement in 1885. In 1885, the railroad was sold, not to any major company, but to a small company called the Foley and South Railroad. The Foley and South Railroad, which opened in 1870, was a small railroad with less than 120 miles and was located mainly in Kansas for the booming lumber, coal, zinc, lead, and salt that was found. It was there that the company prospered, mainly running a handful of 460 Baldwin locomotives. That was until 1885 when the company bought the then bankrupt McKinnon and Midwestern. The company, which had spent $15 million at the time for the railroad, one of the largest purchases until the 1900s for a single company, was done. The railroad then got a hold of all former locomotives of the McKinnon and Midwestern. The company continued to prosper, but in 1888, due to declining health and other complications, then owner Mr. Henry Foley sold his railroad to the Greater Southern, which resulted in a name change in 1890 to form the Midwest and Southern Railroad. The company was then no more until one of Henry Foley's kids talked with the Midwest and Southern and was given, not sold, but given a 40-mile section of the former company's line and number 7 of the original 460 Baldwins that the company ran. This became the Foley Scenic Railroad and still operates to this day with steam mainly serviced. The company, which became the Midwest and Southern after the sale, would then continue to grow and form one of the biggest and grandest companies in railroading history. This has been a little look in part 2 for the history of the Midwest and Southern. Please join us again and we will talk to you not only about the other railroads that eventually became, but some of the most unique locomotives that the company ever owned or built.